Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and our guest today is William Eddy, a family law attorney, therapist, and mediator with over 30 years of experience working with children and families. He is the senior family mediator at the National Conflict Resolution Center in San Diego, California. He is also the president of the High Conflict Institute, which provides speakers, trainers, and consultants on the subject of managing high conflict people in legal disputes, workplace disputes, healthcare, and education. He has taught negotiation and mediation at the University of San Diego School of Law, and he teaches psychology of conflict at the Strauss Institute for Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine University School of Law. His books include Splitting, Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder, BIFF, Quick Responses to High Conflict People, Their Personal Attacks, Hostile Email, and Social Media Meltdowns, It's All Your Fault, 12 Tips for Managing People Who Blame Others for Everything. And today we're going to talk about his latest book, which he co-authored with psychologist Don Saposnek, called Splitting America, How Politicians, Super PACs, and the News Media Mirror High Conflict Divorce. Wow, that's a mouthful. Welcome, Bill.
Well, thank you very much, Miriam. I'm really glad to be available to talk about this today.
Well, you know, it's fascinating that your work has focused so much on conflict and the resolution of conflict. What a fascinating specialty to choose. What drew you into this field?
Well, I've always been attracted to other people's conflicts. I think we all prefer other people's conflicts. And I wanted to understand them, manage them, help them. I've worked with children and families all my life. I actually was a school teacher in the 1970s, child and family counselor in the 1980s. I liked the mediation process, and so I actually became a lawyer in the 1990s and practiced family law, and especially family mediation, because I really believed, and I do believe, that the best place for family disputes is out of court, in more of a structured setting where everyone can hear each other and make proposals and be more rational than an adversarial setting where the goal is to eliminate the other party. So that's what drew me into this.
Yes, indeed. This is such a perfect time for this discussion because we've just finished the 3 presidential debates prior to the election, plus 1 vice presidential debate, all of which are almost textbook lessons of what not to do. And the climate of polarization and adversary relationships seems to be reaching a peak in this country. So I think the timing of your book is amazing.
Well, thank you. We really just felt such an urgent need to get this out. And I should tell you that Don and I were at a conference in June about high conflict divorce, and we're commenting on how the election is becoming, and we should say elections, because it's not just the presidential election.
Of course.
Congressional elections, city elections are all developing this high conflict dynamic that people just feel swept up in and don't understand. So we were talking about that and said we really should explain to people this is much more serious than they realize. It isn't just entertainment. It actually is putting kind of a poisonous air out there into the whole American family. And if we think of America as a family, we're doing to this family what high conflict parents are doing to their families in high conflict divorce cases. And we've got 30 years of history to see that that doesn't work. It really leads to more and more escalation, alienation of children, and in the nation we see the alienation of voters is very strong right now. And we said we've got to write about this now. So we actually wrote this book in 5 weeks.
Wow.
We quickly did our research. We already had some thoughts, each of us, and it really came together well. We had a good synergy between the two of us because we were we're so concerned in the same way about what we're seeing. So I think you're absolutely right. The timing is right. And I'm so glad that you're paying attention to this topic, because I just think the future, people don't realize, can really be affected by this kind of behavior.
I sense that the whole atmosphere is being poisoned by this kind of behavior, but let's go roll that out as we continue our conversation. First, what do you mean by the word splitting in the title, Splitting America?
Well, splitting is really has two meanings. Of course, is splitting in half the nation, where we see, 47% for one candidate, 47% for the other. And a lot of elections these days that are very high conflict turn out to be almost 50-50. So splitting in that regard. But splitting is a psychological term that's associated primarily with two personality disorders, borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, in which the person actually believes that those in their life are either all good or all bad, with no gray areas, no ambivalence, nothing. And it's actually a developmental problem, because children really by 4 or 5 years old have learned that people have good and bad qualities, and they've got to look for both, watch out for both, and also reinforce both of those qualities. So it's really a psychological term as well as a description of how split in half the nation is right now. And it's that the process of splitting is an emotional process. It's an all or nothing process, and people talk about it, especially people with disorders, talk about it in constant crisis. This person's evil, all bad, they're a monster, or I'm perfect, I've never done anything wrong. And we see that play out in high conflict divorce battles. Mm-hmm. And most people are familiar with someone that's going through that, and we think of splitting as a verb, that it's something that's done to families that's emotional, it's got a crisis intensity, it's got all or nothing thinking, and includes attacks on the whole person.
You talk about a high conflict personality who is usually at the heart of one of these high conflict divorces. And also seems to be a characteristic more and more found amongst politicians. What characterizes a high conflict personality?
I think in its most simple terms, there's 4 factors to think of. First of all, it's a preoccupation with other people's behavior and not looking at their own. It's a lot of all or nothing thinking or solutions. We just eliminate the other person, life will be wonderful. There's unmanaged emotions or crisis emotions that really trigger other people's anxiety and motivate action. And there's extreme behaviors. So it isn't just we disagree, it's people spread rumors, spread false information, sometimes attack each other. And we see this in high conflict divorce cases. They may attack each other verbally, financially, physically. We see domestic violence. So it's these 4 characteristics: preoccupation with blaming others, all or nothing thinking, unmanaged or crisis emotions, and extreme behaviors. And it's a pattern of that. In other words, it's part of who they are. That's why we talk about high conflict personalities rather than just high conflict behavior. Almost anyone may engage in some of that on an occasion, but it's a pattern of that behavior. And those are the people we see driving high conflict divorce cases. And what we're seeing is that politicians who might actually be reasonable people are starting to adopt this high conflict pattern of behavior themselves. And that's what our fear is, that we're actually teaching people how to act badly, and this becomes part of children's personality development. So we can affect the nation in the future by the behavior we're seeing today. So that's what we mean by high conflict personality.
Mm-hmm. I will just observe that the behavior that we're seeing today is not only amongst politicians, but it's mirrored in our entertainment. It's mirrored in television, movies, books.
Yes, we're very much seeing that. And I think there's kind of a synergy, a negative synergy between the entertainment businesses, which really have to show extreme behavior to grab attention. A mild movie about a happy family isn't going to go anywhere. You've got to have extremes. So what we see in the culture increasingly as there's competition by entertainment businesses to get an audience, you have to get more and more extreme. So we have more violence, more extreme drama, relationship, bad behavior, people saying extreme things about each other. And our brain is really wired to hook into that. So what attracts attention to promote an entertainment is actually bad behavior. And what we're getting is a dominance in the media in many ways of focusing on this bad behavior as a way to attract followers, and it's damaging, really, I believe.
Yeah, I'm put in mind when I watch some of the so-called news shows of the wrestling, the sort of staged wrestling competitions. Anyway, so I was fascinated by the many tables you have in the book that show the parallels between the dynamics in a divorce situation and the dynamics in politics. What are some of the sort of most outstanding similarities that you see between high conflict divorce and today's elections?
Well, we see several kinds of parallels. First, in terms of the four characteristics I just described of high conflict personalities, that we see drive high conflict divorce. And in some divorces, it's one person with that pattern of behavior, and sometimes it's both people. And we're seeing that now in politics. So we have a preoccupation with the other person. And it's interesting, one article we read said that the definition of a negative ad is one that mentions the other candidate. And when you think about it, you can say what you're going to do, what your plans are, how good they are, without even mentioning the other person's name. So when you look at the ads, the mentioning of the other person's name is close to 100% negative. And so there's this preoccupation with blaming the other candidate for situations that some people kind of joke about as like the entire United States history has been dumped on one or the other candidate at some time during the election process. So we see this preoccupation with blaming the other person rather than really presenting useful information. We see the extremes of thinking, the all or nothing solutions. I'm going to totally eliminate this, or I'm going to totally impose that. And we know that politics is a messy process. Legislation is a messy process, but it's a democratic process. It includes the thinking of many, many people. So our politicians are really supposed to represent us in haggling out and deciding what the best plan is after hearing many points of view. And that's the best way in a divorce as well, is that both parents actively involved in shaping decisions. But in politics today, we're seeing these all or nothing solutions that may or may not be dictated by one candidate or the other. We're seeing really that the crisis emotions really, people don't realize that crisis emotions actually shut down your logical thinking in your brain. That the part of the brain that reacts to crisis is different, and is much more focused on immediate fight, flight, or freeze responses. So if you're faced with, let's say you're walking down a street and there's a runaway truck and it's coming right for you, you don't start calculating things, you run. And so if someone else says run, you run. And so we have this intense crisis emotions in our political speeches now. It's the raised tone, saying how bad the other person is. It's personal attacks. And we see this in high conflict divorce and in politics. The person is evil. The person is a monster. The person's immoral. The person's unethical, or the person's incompetent. You say the other person doesn't have a clue how to run an economy, or the other person doesn't have a clue about foreign policy. I mean, that's quite disrespectful, and yet that's what we see in high conflict divorce as well as in politics today. So we're seeing the all or nothing, the crisis emotions, the personal attacks. It's almost identical to what we see in divorce, and a lot of the language is the same also.